Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Today and next week, we're going to bring you a 2-week series dealing with an issue that many Americans have discussed and is of great importance, that is dealing with STDs and AIDS in particular. And our title of our program is going to be Safe Sex and Prevention of STD and AIDS. In order to carry out this very important discussion, we're very fortunate to have on the program 3 guests. First of all, I welcome to the program Keith Walder, who is the Executive Director of North Idaho AIDS Coalition. Keith, we've had you on the program before some time ago, and welcome back, and congratulations on the success you've had with serving the public on a very serious and important issue.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Tony.
And I'm also pleased to welcome to the program Jeff Lee. He is STD AIDS health nurse with the Panhandle Health District, which includes the 5 northern counties. And Jeff, we know you have a great expertise in this area, and we thank you for sharing with our audience.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm equally pleased to have Danny Mahoney, who is the Prevention Case Manager at North Idaho AIDS Coalition. And Danny, welcome to the program. I've heard some of your lectures, and you are very powerful in the information you provide for people's health. And again, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
As always, I'm very pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, and she will commence today's questioning.
Keith, let's begin with you, and let's first explore for our audience what exactly is the North Idaho AIDS Coalition.
Well, North Idaho AIDS Coalition, Janelle, or NIAC is the acronym. So if we start yelling NIAC, that's who we are. Was formed in 1989, concerned citizens in North Idaho dealing as a support group to support people in North Idaho who had HIV or AIDS, to support their families, their friends, and their loved ones. In the mid-90s, they began to get a little money. They hired my predecessor, very part-time, Lori Lotchout. When she moved on, I was hired in late 98. We got our own nonprofit status at that point, and I began writing grants, and we started collecting some good funding. We were able to hire a case manager to provide care services in, I think it was summer of 2000. Then not long after that, we hired Danny to be the prevention case manager. So then we had to move to offices. We moved to some really interesting small offices, and then outgrew those in about 8 months at the far end of Sherman Avenue, and then ended up downtown. So
you've come a long way, but who are your partners?
Our major partner is the Panhandle Health Department, and Jeff here is the community partner there that we work with the most. We get teased a lot because other outside organizations will come and say, "Who are your community partners?" asking, "What other organizations do you work with?" And we say, "Jeff Lee." And they say, no, community partner. We say, Jeff Lee. They finally get it. He's been a good friend, and the entire health department has been very supportive of our still small organization. 3-4 people is still kind of small, but we have grown and done well.
And Jeff, what kinds of things do you do mainly? What does your job entail?
My job is actually fourfold. I perform the surveillance and epidemiology on STDs and HIV/AIDS in the 5 northern counties, and also I'm very involved in the intervention and prevention aspects, doing testing and counseling, doing treatments, basically counseling is the big part. That's the big piece.
And Danny, you have some special function too. Mm-hmm. So what is your part of the equation here?
Basically what I do is prevention case management is kind of a new thing through the CDC, and it's an individualized level intervention.
And when you say CDC, what do you mean?
Centers for Disease Control.
In Atlanta. Mm-hmm. The
right.
National Center for Disease Control.
And I basically work individually one-on-one with people that are at high risk for either being infected or infecting others with HIV. And we work on kind of developing a risk reduction plan or taking their risk level down. And we do it kind of slowly, step by step. So that's kind of...
I want to, further clarification of certain terms, and we're going to move right into 2 real focuses on this program next week. Is number 1, of course, the most ideal is if one can have prevention by people being empowered with information. Number 2, if that is not the case and someone already has HIV or AIDS, how do you assist and how do you maybe prolong their life? But with that, let's talk for just a moment as I've advertised this program, STD, and then we have -AIDS. And Jeff, we'll start with you. Sexually transmitted diseases, AIDS is not the only disease. So do you work with individuals and this whole organization with at least certainly information, prevention of other forms of sexually transmitted diseases?
Absolutely. STDs are a huge factor in our nation today. There are about 15 million new STDs acquired each year in the United States. And in this health district last year alone, there were 25% more sexually transmitted diseases than all of the other reportable diseases combined.
In the 5 northern counties?
In the 5 northern counties. So it is something that's here and that's a problem.
Is that the same trend across Idaho or the nation?
Pretty much, yeah. The Surgeon General about a year and a half ago released a statement where he pointed out that 5 of the top 10 reportable diseases are STDs, and those 5 account for 87% of all reportable diseases in the United States. So it is significant. We deal with mainly chlamydia, gonorrhea. Occasionally we have some cases of syphilis, the complications of chlamydia and gonorrhea, which can be pelvic inflammatory disease, and then with HIV and AIDS.
But I hear you saying that some STDs are more prevalent, others that for example, syphilis does not have the same kind of rate of infection in recent years as some of the others?
Correct. Fortunately, syphilis, we've had a real low incidence of syphilis over the last 5 years. There seems to be a renewal of syphilis around the country. We just received some information that cases are growing in the major metropolitan areas. It's not a real problem here in the Northwest at this point.
It's like, different forms of cancer, and some, like stomach cancer is not as common as it used to be, and lung cancer is. Do you have any studies that indicate why certain STDs are on the rise and others decline? Because that might be a way of helping for future prevention.
Well, we had a national plan to eliminate syphilis.
Okay.
There was in 1999, there was a published plan for the elimination of syphilis, and that helped in reducing that particular infection. The problem with STDs, including HIV and AIDS, is the most common symptom is no symptoms at all, and that's probably the biggest barrier to people getting treatment. Like with chlamydia, almost 9 out of 10 women are not going to have any symptoms, but this is the leading cause of infertility amongst young women of childbearing age.
And so they may have this problem and not have the ability to have children. Danny, I'm going to turn to you because, again, in some conversation you and I have had when you were presenting at a program in northern Idaho in particular, and it may be true in other places, but you intrigued me with some statistics that we need to talk about, and that is there was a rise in HIV among women and even some of somewhat older age. Would you share with us what that is and why you think that is happening?
Well, I think that the statistic itself with women being on the rise is actually national. Am I correct in that? And in Idaho, I think what we were talking about was that our caseload of HIV positive people we serve it's kind of a strange number because we serve a third gay men, a third women, and a third other either IV drug use or blood transfusion from back in the 80s. And that's a really strange trend when it comes to around the country. Normally the gay men population is higher, and in northern Idaho we do have a increasing, our women on our caseload is higher than other places.
And in some of those cases, maybe they were infected some years ago and it's now appearing, or I shouldn't be trying to answer because I'm not the one to answer the question, but why is the statistic changed? What's the theory behind it?
Well, we found with the women that we know that are infected, that are heterosexual women, a lot of them were infected by their husbands who they thought they were in monogamous relationships with. Wasn't necessarily the case, so they weren't really aware.
Or they might have been secretive intravenous drug users.
Right.
We use acronyms like IDU for intravenous drug user.
Yeah,
So I don't want to throw that out there.
With too many acronyms, stop us.
Please
You've all
stop.
done that already. I've never seen
We have our own language.
a business that's got so many acronyms.
Right. Keith, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, A lot of the places in the Rocky Mountain West, that this corridor, are really more gay men, bisexual men, but we've seen more women. We've had about a 25% increase in terms of client load since April. And that's been a cause for concern, especially since a number of them have been new infections, right, Jeff? Native here to North Idaho. And that's been unusual, too. So we have some concerns about what's going on, what's happening. Women are presenting in emergency rooms with full-blown AIDS, or at their doctor's office with full-blown AIDS, very ill, because their physician it didn't occur to the physician that in North Idaho, a straight woman might have HIV.
Right.
That's been a cause of concern, educating the medical community.
Okay, Janelle Burke.
Well, I want to follow up with that and start right out with you, Keith, again, and ask a question about what if there is someone out there who is concerned? I mean, there are a lot of reasons why people don't want to go here or there to, or even they might be denying that they would likely have it. What is a reason why people should go and should find out what their status might be?
Because the earlier the treatment, the better effects of that treatment, and we can get you the help, the medical help, any kind of help that you need, so that you can have a longer, more productive life. It used to be that it was 6 to 18 months from diagnosis to death. Now,
with AIDS.
With AIDS. Now we don't know. Because of the medications since 1996, longevity has increased. And people are having heart attacks and strokes and other medical problems that they never had. That's not great news, but on the other hand, it is good news in that you're living a longer life and you're having problems that the rest of the citizenry is that's not infected with HIV. So
okay, so one reason is to so that you yourself will live a longer life. Mm-hmm. Jeff, let's go to you. What might be another reason that a person should go early, go find out if they have any doubts?
Certainly, personally for themselves, the benefits of early diagnosis and treatment is important, but also these infections don't occur in a vacuum. Somebody else had it and gave it to them, and they may have passed on to other people. And those folks have a right to know so that they can seek testing and treatment. They may not be aware that they have HIV. There are no symptoms. You look healthy, you feel healthy, and yet it's alive and well inside of you and passing on to other people.
Then how do most people find out that they might have it?
That's an area of concern. We, of course, have our testers that come in every 6 months because they're worried. We call them, sometimes they're worried well.
They're people who are at risk, actually are at risk.
Maybe, maybe not. If they are at risk, then I'm concerned. I'm wanting to work with them on what behaviors are putting them at risk. But last year, about 80% of the folks that we tested positive here in the health district were already at AIDS. They'd already developed AIDS. So
Should
they
you
were
back
testing.
up and explain to our audience that might not be familiar the difference between being diagnosed with HIV and then full-blown AIDS?
Certainly. Let me differentiate. HIV is the germ. It stands for human immunodeficiency virus, and it's the germ that leads to AIDS eventually. AIDS stands for acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. It's not truly a disease. It's a cluster of diseases or complications caused by a weakened immune system. And that's what HIV does. It attacks the immune system so that people with things in their bodies that they would normally be able to handle, they can no longer handle. They're called opportunistic infections, and this is what makes people sick, and this is what ultimately causes death from HIV and AIDS. Again, that's the benefit of getting tested early. It's not such an uphill battle. Early in the infection, when your immune system is still mostly there, mostly functioning, the drugs can really provide a lot of benefit. If your immune system has been challenged to the point where it really isn't there anymore, then the drugs can act as a stopgap, but it's a big uphill climb back to health.
And Danny, back to my question now, why would a person want to present? What about helping other people not to become infected? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that Keith and Jeff both hit good points with wanting to find out your own status so you can, seek medical care. And also, the more you know, if you know you are infected, you can stop yourself from infecting other people, unknowingly especially. So if you're aware of your status, then you know you can learn how to protect yourself and protect other people in the process.
And I know that you do some preventive kinds of medicine. And so what do you say when you're talking about prevention?
Oh, that takes a long time to explain. In a nutshell. Basically what I do is I sit down with people and we look at what risk is. Because risk, that we always talk about that there's benefits to risk taking. We all do it. We decide one day we're not going to wear our seatbelt to the grocery store. The next day we do. So there's reasons we take risks, reasons we don't. And I've learned that through working with people that I'm trying to help protect themselves from HIV, that if I say condom use every time, all the time, I'd love to say it and I'd love to have it work, but it doesn't tend to work. So what we do is we say, okay, if you normally are having unprotected sex 100% of the time, let's cut that back to 50. And let's see how that works. Let's see if you can use a condom 50% of the time you're having sex. And then we'll kind of wait and see how that goes. And if they do fine with that, we'll bump it up to 75. And we kind of do these little baby steps, kind of a risk reduction style.
The key to prevention is behavior change, and it's not a linear process. People have to make attempts. They're going to fail at their attempts, and it's a matter of retrying.
Keith, I'm going to come back to you in relation to all of this, and that is that you've indicated that there has been a medical breakthrough from time to time on the drugs, not cure.
There's no cure.
At this point, no cure. The hope is that someday there will be. And the President of the United States has just, in his State of the Union message, indicated that, and I was pleased to hear that we're going to have some more funds available in this research. So maybe down the road we will find a cure, as we have for polio and smallpox and all, although we know the danger of smallpox from terrorists. But I've read some reports recently that because people live longer than used to, in other words, when the problem reached its great height and the lifespan was very short, an awful lot of people engaging in certain behavior became much more safe sex conscious. And now I hear that the fact that there's a longer lifetime, that people are going back to more risky behavior nationally. I've heard that. Is that
and I
your
think that's
experience
true
too?
locally too. There's a certain complacency, lack of urgency that, and with younger folk at risk, and youth are very much at risk when we look at numbers and statistics. They're thinking this is an old person's disease, and 40s is old for a lot of them. So they say, well, that's where the infections are. I can't get it. There's a sense of invulnerability with our youth that comes along with this. And they think that the medications are really cures. And if you look at the advertising a lot for the drugs, you see incredibly athletic people, men and women, mountain climbing, kayaking, backpacking, biking, and you think, okay, if I get HIV, I'm going to look as good as that guy. I'll take the medications, and you've heard that. Jeff and Danny have heard this story too. So there's a complacency, there's a belief that there's a cure. There are other concerns pressing on people's lives, and HIV risk and infection is just one of those. A lot of people are more concerned about housing. And 60 to 70% of all people with HIV at some point are housing challenged.
And I'd like to point out that with the increase in women contracting HIV, this becomes a major factor. They may not be able to practice safe behaviors because they can't negotiate for those safe behaviors. They're in a relationship where there's abuse, or they feel that if they don't comply with their partner's wishes, they lose their housing, they lose their income. These are all major factors and more immediate and of larger concern oftentimes to the woman than the risk of contracting HIV or some other sexually transmitted disease. So the empowerment portion or piece is really a big part of prevention.
Danny, you do a lot of advising and consulting and all. And in relation to what Keith had to say, do you find that the younger people you work with are more willing to take risks? That notice as people are older and more experienced, they're more likely to practice safe sex?
The older ones are more likely to practice safe sex? I think, my younger clients that I see or I deal with, also, it's always been the thing, they didn't see what HIV did in the 80s.
Right.
They didn't see it. They didn't lose their entire address book of friends. They didn't lose their entire block of, around their their home. So they're younger and they didn't see any of that, so they didn't see the devastation. So they kind of think now, I mean, I've heard people kind of talk about it being like diabetes. You take insulin and you're fine. You just learn how to manage your life, and it's not, they don't see it as much as a fatal thing as it is. So I think that due to that, they're probably less likely. And just being young and kind of crazy and wanting to not have to deal with all of the condom burnout, basically.
The other thing, and next week, almost the entire show, and again, I've heard Keith and Danny on this a lot, we're going to get very specific about safe practices and trying to, above all, to prevent the disease from happening. But I want to talk for a minute about the economic impact. Keith, you just alluded to it a minute ago, but for individuals, even though that they may take certain medications, they have to take a lot, is my understanding, and then there's an incredible economic impact. Would you share, even if someone is risk-taking and willing to take medication, now they may not be aware of what it's going to do to them economically?
If you're too ill to work, as they say in America, most of us are about one mortgage payment shy of homelessness. And if you're too ill to work, and if you don't have disability, and it's hard to get disability these days, you can end up in a real economic downspin that's hard to pull out of. Medications can cost anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 a month.
So if you are out of your home,
yeah,
and you're talking $2,000 to $3,000 a month for medication, you have no job, what do you do?
Well, if you're in North Idaho, you call NIAC. And we can't save you, but we can work with you. And we do have another community partner who's not at the table today, which is CHAS, the Community Health Association of Spokane. And they rolled out with federal funding an HIV medical dental clinic in Spokane that serves not only Eastern Washington, but North Idaho. And it's one of the first bi-state HIV clinics in the country, and we had an opportunity to work with them. If you have no health insurance, no income, you come to us here in North Idaho, and we'll help you get set up with our partners at CHAS, and they have an HIV specialist. They're very devoted. It's a labor of love over there at CHAS for folks who need help.
Are you saying, though, that if someone is absolutely penniless and they're going to need $2,000 to $3,000 in medication per month, that there's always a remedy for them to get that?
Not always, but we haven't had too many people go without their medications. Sometimes it takes a little bit of by hook or crook, but there are federal flow-through programs called AIDS Drug Assistance Program, or ADAP, through the states, where you can get a lot of your AIDS, HIV medications paid for. So we can work with folks on that, help them get their medications, help them keep taking them. It's really hard to take those pills.
One more question, and back to Janelle, and then again next week I'm emphasizing the prevention. But Danny, there's a social support aspect to this. Certainly when people are in this situation, there's got to be just a real psychological and emotional challenge to the whole process, and I would imagine great depression. Mm-hmm. How does your organization, and you in particular, work from that end? If we move away for a minute from the the medication and the health issue, what kind of support systems are available? Because it's got to be a very traumatic time.
Absolutely. We actually have we have an HIV positive gay men support group that's called Positive Power that runs over here. We have we're just starting a couple of new positive people support groups that are not going to be gender specific. They're going to be women and men HIV positive people getting together. It's an 8-week group that's going to be ongoing. And then we also, I know through Community Health Association of Spokane, there is some counseling and a psychiatrist on staff to help with that, with the depression that goes along with it.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
I want to talk about some methods of transmitting the HIV. We can talk about other kinds of diseases later, but with regard to HIV, Jeff, what are the most common means of transmitting? And then can you dispel some myths about how HIV can be transmitted?
First off, HIV is what's called a blood-borne pathogen. It circulates in the system. It attacks white blood cells. That's its primary target. Specifically a cell called the T4 helper cell, which is the quarterback of our immune system. Everything revolves around it. So obviously blood is going to be one method if you come in contact with blood, say in the early 80s before they were screening the blood supply. If you got a transfusion, obviously that was a very dangerous method of getting HIV.
But not so much anymore.
No, they're pretty good about screening the blood supply. We want to caution people that going to donate blood is not a good way to get tested, simply because it may not show up. There is a lag time where your body is responding to the HIV, where it may come up negative and you feel good about it, but you've actually now got infected blood out in the blood supply. Other body fluids that carry a high rate of HIV would be semen, vaginal secretions, and breast milk. Through sexual intercourse, you come in contact with both semen and vaginal secretions, possibly blood, possibly breast milk. The main ways of spreading it is through sexual contact, IV drug users sharing their needles, or what are called the works.
And how does the needle situation work? Is it basically that they're using the needle, a dirty needle, so to speak?
Right. Most people that are using injection drugs don't have the funding to go out and buy needles. You need a prescription to buy needles. In Idaho, you definitely need a prescription. So you can't just go out and get clean needles. When you need a fix, you don't have time to clean your works. You don't have time to clean your needles. And if they go to shooting galleries, places where other people provide the drugs and they provide the needles, you don't know who's used those needles before you, and they're certainly not cleaning them in between their customers.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion, but the news for our viewers is that you'll be back next week. We'll pick up right where you left off, and works, for example, you didn't get to explain, and so we'll do that next week. I want to thank all three of you for being here today. It's been most informative, and certainly next week will be too. And maybe the heart of this whole purpose of the program is to try to talk about some preventive methods, particularly on HIV and AIDS, but also for other STDs. And then we'll pick up there next week. Ladies and gentlemen, we think this program has been most valuable, and we'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when I will, with Janelle, pick up on this important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We welcome you back to the second week of our program addressing STDs and AIDS in particular. And our three guests are back from last week. It was most informative, and we want to continue that conversation on a very serious and important topic. First of all, welcome to the program Keith Walder, who is the Executive Director of the North Idaho AIDS Coalition. Keith, welcome back. It was very informative last week.
Thank you. It's good to be here again, Tom.
And I want to welcome back Jeff Lee, who is STD AIDS Health Nurse for the Panhandle Health District, which is the 5 northern counties of Idaho. And Jeff, you're certainly an expert on the health questions, and again, we're pleased to have you back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
And I'm also very pleased to welcome back Danny Mahoney, who is the Prevention Case Manager for North Idaho AIDS Coalition. And Danny, not only do you have a lot of clients and you advise on many things, but you're also an excellent lecturer on preventive methods. And again, thanks for coming back this week.
Thank you.
And as always, I'm so pleased to have Janelle Burke as our regular panelist, and she will start the questioning today.
At the end of last week's show, we were talking about the methods of transmitting, particularly HIV, and I want to start at that point again. Our show last week, and this week too, is meant to be informational and educational to the people who are out there viewing, and hopefully can be of some help to individuals as well. But Jeff, let's start with you, and can you give a brief rundown of what some of the methods are, and then what some of the methods are not as well?
Certainly.
So,
a quick review. HIV is a bloodborne pathogen. It's carried in the blood. It's also in high doses in semen, and in vaginal secretions, and in breast milk. So anything that brings you in contact with these body fluids and a significant exposure to those body fluids puts you at risk for contracting HIV. Blood transfusions, sharing needles or works, and I think we didn't quite get works
can you explain
defined,
to our viewers
certainly.
what works is?
Even amongst the population using IV drugs, they'll think in terms of sharing needles as the only thing that puts them at risk. But when they're preparing their drugs, whether it's heroin or meth, it's actually cooked. You heat the drug up with some water so it goes into solution, and then they draw it up through a cotton ball into the syringe, the cotton ball acting as a filter. Then they'll inject, and then they'll rinse their syringe in water. Well, any of those will have traces of blood, the cooker, the cotton ball, or the water. These are what are called the works. And people may have their own needles, but share the works, and so they continue to be at risk for HIV as well as for hepatitis B and hepatitis C.
What are some ways that HIV is not transmitted that people may be fearful about?
In the early days, everybody was absolutely panicky. They, don't touch me, don't hug me, don't kiss me, don't use my bathroom, don't use my water fountain. I don't want your children in my classroom, that type of thing. It's not passed through casual contact. Hugging, kissing, these are not methods of transmitting it. Sharing eating utensils is not a method of transmitting it. A lot of people are concerned about transmission by mosquitoes. It's not transmitted this way. It needs human blood cells to replicate. It's not going to replicate inside the gut of a mosquito. The stomach is a pretty harsh place for anything to survive. It's full of acid. And a mosquito, we're not smorgasbord. They don't take from a little bit from each person, and they drink from one and they're done. So that's not past that method.
Now, Keith, some numbers. What kind of a number are we looking at around the area?
We have currently in the 5 northern counties 30 HIV positive or full-blown AIDS clients at NIAC. We know there's a few others in the area that have not come to us for services or maybe accessing services elsewhere. That's not a high incidence, but what has been a concern for us are the STD marker, like chlamydia and gonorrhea, that indicate that people are at risk for HIV. There's a great deal of that out there that we're worried about.
You increase the chances of getting HIV if you have those other diseases.
Right. Medically, you're much more, or biologically, you're much more susceptible to getting HIV if you have other STDs. This has been shown in studies and statistics. So when folks have chlamydia and gonorrhea, we're concerned about them getting HIV. A lot of the younger folk in our part of the country are also getting these sexually transmitted diseases. And if HIV is introduced into those sexual circles, there's a big cause for concern there. That's what worries me and why we need to increase the prevention.
And what do you see as the trends? Are there some other trends that you can see? Trends toward more women involved?
There are more women who are getting HIV than we're comfortable seeing because the demographics are so different, even from Spokane, just across the state line, where it's still more gay men who seem to be getting HIV. We're concerned for women, for the gay men, and for the injecting drug users. As you know, meth is epidemic around here, and that puts the IV drug users at great risk too.
Danny, I'm going to go with a series of questions with you. Let's talk about preventive, and I'll go through a series of questions, and as an expert, you share them. first of all, one of the, if I understand, is that the more sexual partners a person has, the greater the increase. So would you just spend a little time on that issue, monogamous relationship versus a number of partners?
Okay. Basically, if you only have one partner and your partner only has you, then there's a lot less risk of picking up anything else. The more partners you have, you're basically having all the partners that they have had. So if someone has one partner who has had 4 partners before you, then you
5.
basically have 5. And so it kind of, there's a map they have. I haven't seen one in a while, but it has these pictures, one little person in the middle who had one sexual partner, and they had actually, there was like 14 on the page. Because basically the more people you are having sexual encounters with, the more likely you are to come across with, it's kind of the Russian roulette kind of thing. The more times you spin the barrel, the more likely you are to actually
get the bullet.
Exactly.
So if someone is monogamous and they're feeling very safe, but they don't have a trusting partner, or the partner's lied to them, and that partner's had 10 other experiences in recent times, and then that you've not had a monogamous relationship.
Right.
And so that increases the whole process. Then next is that let's talk about, again, even if one has a monogamous relationship, let's talk about some of the most high risk. I know in your lectures you talk about higher and lower risk. Now, so to try to help and that's our purpose for doing this, and we do this show in good taste, but let's try to share with some of our viewers out there. We hope there isn't, but there may be some viewers out there that don't have this knowledge. So talk about high risk behavior versus more safe behavior.
Okay. Do you want to kind of go through kind of the scale of what we consider risky to least risky?
Right.
Well, according to studies that have been proven, is that anal sex as the receiver is the riskiest type of sex there is, due to the fact
that's
that
the top of the list.
Due to the fact that you can have 2 different body fluids there, because there could be a blood contact and a semen contact. Then you've got double exposure, and in which case then it would become a riskier thing for HIV. The next on the list would be, we won't go through all of the receiver and giver. And the next one is vaginal sex, would be the next riskiest, and then oral sex. And then it kind of goes down the line from there as not necessarily being very risky after that. Kissing, all that stuff, like Jeff had said, it's not transmittable that way. So those are the basic. It kind of goes from anal sex down to vaginal sex to oral sex, from highest risk to least risky.
And then in addition to those different kinds of descriptions that you've made, then if in those practices one uses certain measures such as condoms and so forth, then you also increase the, without the use of those, you increase the risk, right?
Right. If you're using protection, condoms, dental dams, any of these things, all of those things go down even to be, they're less risky if you're using a barrier protector.
Any form of barrier is helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Jeff, I'd like for you to, as the nurse, come in on this too and talk about, in relation to this, what Danny's talked about too, what other advice you would give to try to, human beings are sexual, and human beings are going to be active sexually, particularly young people. And so rather than say that you guarantee that none of this is ever going to happen, and except in marriage, is, I guess, a world of fantasy. So
it causes me concern when I hear that.
Yeah. So elaborate upon that, please.
Certainly. There's basically 3 ways to provide some level of safety. When I'm talking in the high schools to those kids, I tell them the only 100% sure way not to get a sexually transmitted disease, don't have sex.
Right.
Abstinence. But we are sexual beings, and I use the illustration. If we stop having sex as a species, we're going to die out. On the other hand, if every time we have sex, we're passing on a disease or acquiring a disease that is going to kill us or our children, it's not good either. So some of the other things that they can do to be safe. Monogamy. In this day and age, we often practice serial monogamy. We may be only with one partner, but it's for a short period of time, and then they're with another partner. And so it's not as safe. Monogamy is not as safe as abstinence.
So it's not really monogamy. If you ever so many months having a new partner.
Right. It's called serial monogamy. It's not
right.
actual monogamy.
And you want to make sure that you have the same definition of monogamy as your partner does, that it means sexual exclusivity, because sometimes monogamy is means if my partner's traveling on business, I don't have to be sexually exclusive.
Right. And what acts, can constitute sex and monogamy, that's a big issue. A lot of people have different definitions of what is sex. Oral sex for a lot of people is not considered sex. From the germ's perspective, it is, though, and that's the point I try to make. And then the final method of staying safe, like Danny talked about, was barrier protection, the condoms and the dental dams. But people need to know that they're not 100% even if you use them consistently and correctly, and that's the key. And people often find themselves in situations where, in the heat of the moment, we don't make good decisions. And in the heat of the moment, we're not going to use a condom or a dental dam appropriately, and especially if alcohol or drugs are
I was going to say, if alcoholism is involved in that, people are more risk-taking.
Right. But what we're interested in is risk reduction. We know we're not going to do risk elimination. That's not our goal. That would be an unachievable goal. So we look at risk reduction. If somebody in the course of a session says, well, I have unprotected sex, like Danny was saying. Let's see if we can have you have protected sex a certain number of times. Contract with me to use a condom more often, or contract with me to use a condom. Say if you're practicing anal sex, during anal sex, use a condom. Okay, if you don't use it anywhere else, use it there, so that we can reduce the risk.
There's some sex therapists and specialists, and we hear about them and read about them. And in relation to that, when from a physical perspective, I heard a woman who's an expert on this being interviewed, and she said, again, when Danny talked about that there's some acts that are more risky than others, and again, we're trying to be in good taste, but there are certain parts of the body that the lining is much thinner, and you're more likely to do damage or tear, and anal sex would do that more than
it's not a self-lubricating orifice. The vagina is a self-lubricating orifice. It's designed for penetration. The anus is not. It's the mucosal membrane of the rectum is very fragile. So any penetration is probably going to cause some trauma. And that trauma opens up a doorway for germs to get into the body. That's why this is considered the highest risk behavior. People who practice this, if they're going to practice it, need to use plenty of artificial lubrication. They need to be using barrier protection, and they need to be using a lot of caution, because it is very dangerous. Plus, there are germs in our gut tract that are absolutely positively normal there. We need them to be healthy, but they don't belong anywhere else. Oral sex is considered the least risky of those because the mouth is an inhospitable place to a lot of germs. There are already a lot of germs in our mouth.
We eat a lot of foods that are raw vegetables and all that.
Right.
The mouth is, I guess, nature has protected us in some ways.
Right, and we have the tonsils and the other lymphoid tissue provides some protection. Plus, anything going into the mouth ultimately works its way down to the stomach, which is full of acid. So this is some protection, but I want people to realize that if they come in contact with those body fluids that I named, the blood, the semen, the vaginal secretions, or the breast milk of somebody who has HIV, they're at risk.
Really. One other question. There's so many questions. If I go back to Janelle, we're taping this program in early February, and it's going to air in March. But I understand that there's a new test out for AIDS that you can go into a doctor or a clinic, and before you leave the clinic, you can get the results. Are those, Jeff, do you think are going to be as accurate as those that take more time for testing, or should a person do both tests?
If somebody does the OraQuick, and that's the one you're talking about, it's a finger stick. And they're saying that the sensitivity and specificity of the test are equivalent to the serum test that we do when we do a blood draw, which translates as good as the blood draw test. The benefit is it gives somebody a quick turnaround on their test results. They're not waiting for 2 weeks to find out whether or not they're HIV positive. Our protocol at the health department is regardless of the type of test, if it comes back positive, we're going to test you again.
Sure.
And we're going to do a blood draw to do it. just because.
So it's a first step, though, then, for that next test.
Certainly, it's a first step. It would be like the OraSure that NIAC uses, which is a swab, an oral swab. It's a good indicator. It gives people a quick turnaround. They can find out what their status is, which is important. People need to know that. But then it does need to be backed up with other tests.
On a national program a couple of days ago, I was just, I guess, puzzled with this. Some medical doctors reporting that a number of individuals come in for an AIDS test or before this new test, and they leave, and it was quite a high percentage, would never come back for the results. Maybe, Keith, you'd like to deal with that. This is such a psychological, emotional problem. Can they just not face knowing the results?
I consistently, and for myself, with my testing, one of the most excruciating waits that you have is that week or 2 weeks for your results, wondering, do I have HIV or not? Even if you know what your risks are up here, your heart is just beating away and there's a certain agony there. So we want to be able to mitigate or soften that agony. So a quick turnaround there is helpful, but some people just can't come back and get the results. And so we try and develop a relationship with that person through a pre-test counseling, encouraging them to come back.
And that increases the chances.
That increases the chances. We work with the Panhandle so that we can do these oral tests and it provide another place for folks. If they're too nervous to go into the health department, they can come to NIAC, and it's a different kind of environment, neither better nor worse, just different.
This program goes in Canada and other places too, and there are other centers, other places where this service is available if they hesitate to go to a particular center. Mm-hmm. Before we go back, Janelle, I think you have a pin for us.
Yeah, I was going to give you these earlier. Jeff and I have the state of Idaho pins with an AIDS ribbon. We'd like to give one to both of you, Janelle and Tony. I'll reach here. Idaho Responds to AIDS was a theme a couple years back, and I think they're very effective
It's
pins.
part of your informational campaign, I'm sure.
Right. We want folks to be aware that HIV is out here, and we're doing something about it.
Keith and I are not only active locally, but we sit on the executive committee for the state community planning group for HIV/AIDS prevention and care.
Thank you. Janelle Burt.
Well, following along with what you were saying, I know that some people are concerned about the confidentiality, for example. And so can you speak to that, Keith? What happens with regard to confidentiality?
Your name doesn't go outside of the room and the conversation unless there is a test positive. Then Idaho law, and Jeff, help me if I say this wrong, but Idaho law is that if you test positive, we're what's called a names reporting state. And so we need to contact Jeff if your name is, if you come up HIV positive, but he'll have a conversation with you, concerned to let your partners know, help you let any partners know that you may have exposed them to HIV, and to get them into testing. So the intent is good. It can be kind of scary for folks, but Jeff's a pretty soft sell on that. So, and if he wants to add more on that.
Yeah, I would. Idaho was originally one of the few HIV reporting states. We've been reporting HIV since 1986. There's still a couple states that are only AIDS reporting. Washington became HIV reporting just a few years ago. It's a confidential name report. If I get a referral from Keith, or if I test somebody positive, or I get a referral from another physician, when I talk to that person, it's confidential. If I assist them in notifying partners, they basically remain anonymous. Their partners will never know who they are, when this exposure may have occurred, or how it may have occurred. This is how we ensure confidentiality for the individual and also notification for the partners. The information then goes from me to the next level at the state, and the name is completely removed. Nothing with any kind of identifier for that person goes beyond the state, and it's kept in a very confidential database. And the reason we do this is we're not trying to be Big Brother, but Keith spoke last week about ADAP, and there's other funding programs. And to allow people to access these funding programs, we actually have to know who they are. So providing this information is really to their benefit.
My next question is for Danny, and that is about abusive partners. If a person is in an abusive relationship and the partner is someone who might be risky in either their behavior with drugs or their behavior with other people sexually, what do you tell that person who's in that abusive relationship? How can they protect themselves? And anyone else can jump in here that feels like they would like to speak to that question, but what do you say?
We gave her the hard question, so
that's
I think I'll just let her over to you, Danielle.
You know, the woman who's in an abusive relationship and she doesn't feel like she's got anywhere to go, but at the same time, she recognizes that there's a whole lot of risk involved in her relationship. And so she's kind of staying there out of default, if you will. But she knows there's a lot of risk. What are some steps that a person can take who's in a situation like that?
I think if I was dealing with a woman in that situation, my first gut reaction would be to call the Women's Center, because I'm not expertise in domestic violence by any means. So I would try to call someone who knows about domestic violence to get involved, to kind of help move the woman out of the situation if possible. And then we could start working on some of the sexual risky behaviors that had happened and talk about what went on in the relationship. But it wouldn't seem appropriate to me to try to get her, because it could be a very dangerous situation for her to try to start negotiating safer sex with an abusive partner when she knows she needs to get out of the relationship first. So that's my...
I think that's a good answer.
It's an excellent first step is to get them away from the dangerous situation. Then you can deal with the other issues. But their safety is of primary concern, and we have an excellent resource in the Women's Center here locally.
I guess I want to be futurist in my next question, and that's always a projection that's risky in the sense that we don't know the future. But this is to all three of you, and that is, are you optimistic? Do you think two things? One, do you think that a lot of progress is being made across the country to provide the proper information and to have more prevention awareness? And number two, do you think we'll, down the road, find a cure for AIDS, HIV and AIDS?
If I may, I think we have a lot of good people interested in the future, in educating people and in making a world where HIV is not a threat. We have obviously a lot of hurdles and barriers to get over and through, but we're working on it. We can't hold our breath for a cure.
Because globally, it's the numbers are staggering. The number of people that are that have HIV and AIDS and are dying, millions.
Right, and so it's going to boil down to personal responsibility. People are going to have to make choices to keep themselves safe, to know their status and their partner's status. That's the primary means of preventing the spread of HIV.
Danny?
I think Jeff hit it pretty well. I would say the same thing. I think in the time that I've worked in the field of HIV and AIDS, met a lot of amazing people who have put a lot of time and a lot of effort and are continuing to do so. Like Jeff said, though, I don't know if I'd hold my breath for a cure, other than, education being that cure and knowledge about how it spread.
And Keith?
There are days that I'm hopeful, and there are days that I'm not so hopeful about the future of humankind in a lot of ways, and that includes HIV. I am not holding my breath for a cure in my lifetime. I don't expect to see one. I think what we need to do is attack HIV through the two prongs of prevention and care. And we provide care for those who have HIV, support them into healthy lifestyles, and we provide prevention for people at risk. That involves not just information, but helping them personally believe that they can actually stay healthy, whether they're positive or negative with HIV.
And something I'd like the public to remember is that it's not the people with HIV that are the enemy, or it's the germ.
That you've led me into my final question. We have a little over 2 minutes left, and that is that there are very harsh statements made to individuals who are infected. And what would you say to them on this program if some are watching? What kind of comfort do you give them when there are some people who make statements is that they get what they deserve. And how do you comfort them? Danny, maybe we'll take you on this one.
I keep getting the very hard questions, very first ones off. I guess basically what I'd probably say to anyone who came to me saying that they have heard that would be basically just to have them understand that ignorance kind of breeds fear, and fear causes angry statements like that, and that pretty much it's people not knowing.
Okay. Keith, about 30 seconds.
I had that bumper sticker flash through my head when you asked the question that says, fight HIV, not people living with HIV. Mm-hmm. And I think that emphasis, and then to tell people who experience rejection that here at NIAC, it's a safe place, and you're welcome here.
On that note, we bring the program to conclusion. On behalf of Janelle Burke and our panel, we thank all three of you, Keith, Danny, and Jeff, for these two programs. They've been highly informative, and you've been very professional, as you always are. And we hope, as we always, with all of our programs, that it's been helpful to our viewers. The whole idea of this program is to provide information, and people can take it and use it in the way that they think is most wise for them. And again, you've been gracious with your time, and we thank you for taking all this time. Ladies and gentlemen, with this program, we bring to a close the 2 weeks that's been dealing with this issue of STDs and AIDS and HIV. We hope you'll be with us again next week at the same time, when we'll move to yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.